Hello, my name is Sophia Wilson, and I am a student at Framingham State University. I am helping to research Mary Miles Bibb and the Voice of the Fugitive newspaper. I'm a double major in English and political science, and I have spent the last semester researching and mapping articles from this newspaper. We discovered a lot of content collections to sort these articles into, including things like working with fugitive slaves, women's suffrage, resettlement of fugitive slaves, and so on. I chose to write my webpage on the broader category of electoral politics, but this can include anything from elections and candidates in Congress, laws, acts, and speeches. So at about a quarter of the way through the entire collection, we have discovered 35 articles pertaining to the broader category of electoral politics. Specifically, there have been 24 articles pertaining to elections, candidates, and Congress, 10 articles on laws and acts being passed or discussed, such as the postage or travel laws, and 5 articles that were reprinted speeches from people like Horace Mann or President Millard Fillmore. I chose to focus on this theme because I have plans to go to law school and become an attorney once I graduate from FSU, which at the time of this video will be in 2 years. I have also always been interested in how laws are passed and the contents of passed versus unpassed laws, and the ways in which political figures can influence this process. More importantly, laws and politics can greatly influence hundreds of thousands of people with just a single passage. So I wanted to look at how laws and politics work to shape the lives of everybody at the time of this newspaper circulation, which is from about 1851 to 1852. The articles, in a general sense, do provide so much information, not necessarily about how the laws were passed, but more about how they impacted people at this time. One article was titled Two Publishers and Editors from the April 23, 1851 issue, and it discussed a new postage law. Another article in the same issue deals with this law, and the article is called New Postage Law. With this law, we see a higher tax and postage between the U.S. and Canada. This greatly affects the Voice of the Fugitive, seeing as it's a Canadian newspaper that relies on getting circulation within the U.S. Many postmasters, even within Canada, were not acquainted with the Voice of the newspaper staff as publishers or editors, so they were being taxed heavier already just to send the newspaper. It also affected those in the U.S. who wished to correspond with the editor, and imposed a higher tax on those in the U.S. wishing to receive the newspaper. People had to redirect their correspondence directly to the publishers and editors, as opposed to the newspaper. This is a problem first because not everyone could afford to pay that tax, which would have been 6 pence or 10 cents US dollars today per half ounce, or 9 pence, which is around 15 cents US dollars in California and Oregon. This could mean losing first-hand accounts of what was happening to people in the United States. If people can't send letters or feel deterred from doing so, the newspaper has less information about what's going on outside of Canada. People would also risk losing their subscriptions to the newspaper, limiting the spread of information and conversation. This is especially important at the time of the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, which was just passed, so this would greatly limit people's ability to talk about what's going on in their lives. The Fugitive Slave Act was so important that we actually have a different webpage dedicated solely to it. So if you'd like to go check it out, please do. I highly recommend it. Switching gears a bit, we can also look at the article titled Progress of Liberty in the United States from the May 21st, 1851 issue. It discusses a new Delaware law which prohibits any free black person from, quote, coming into that state hereafter to reside under a penalty of $50. The offender, in case he be unable to pay the fine, is sold beyond the limits of the state for a sufficient sum to pay the fine and all costs, end quote. It also states that any captain of a vessel looking to help a free black person enter the state against this law will be fined $200. The law excludes those temporarily entering the state for trade purposes, seafaring men, and servants. But essentially, Delaware made it illegal for free black people to be in Delaware for any prolonged period of time. We should keep in mind that a $50 fine in 1851 would be the equivalent of just under $2,000 today. Many people might not have been able to pay that fine at that time, so if you could not pay it, you could be sold to an entirely different state in order to pay it off. It is unclear if it meant being sold into slavery, but at this time, there were not any protections for free black people that would keep them from being sold into slavery. So unfortunately, it could have been a very real possibility that those people unable to pay this fine were being sold into slavery. However, the article does not directly specify. By today's standards, this law is atrocious and bigoted, but by the standards of 1851, this was seen as perfectly normal by those who believed in segregation and slavery. So, why does this all matter today? Well, I think it matters because there was a point in our history, as we can see through this newspaper, where slavery was legal, and where black and brown people were not considered people by legal and social standards. and where the only people with full legal and social rights was a very small population of white men. We need to learn this history. We need to learn and see how wrong this all was, and how detrimentally unfair and unjust this all was for them. Excuse me. Learning about the past, especially about past errors, is a great way to make sure that we learn from them and do better for the future. Legislation is being passed today that limits the rights of women, LGBTQ people, people of color, and so forth. The people passing these laws oftentimes hold no stakes in these laws and pass laws which don't apply to their demographic. Looking at laws of the past through this newspaper shows us how negatively they affected people from multiple generations and can help us begin to make up for this past. If we ignore it or skew it, we ignore the populations which had to suffer because of it, and that is not fair or just by any means. Thank you very much for your time.